So this year's India Clean Transport Summit, as you know, this is the third edition. Every year it's getting bigger, better, both in terms of partnership, but also hopefully in terms of content as well, as we discuss accelerating clean transport in India. This year we are extremely thrilled to have Ministry of Heavy Industries as the official supporter for the conference. And thanks a lot both to Secretary Shri Kamana Rizvi sir, who could not join us today, but also Hanif Qureshi sir, who is here with us from the Ministry of Heavy Industry. We're also thrilled to have the Norway Embassy partnering for the summit. And we are very thrilled to kind of learn a lot from Norway as well as something that we can also share with them. Norwegian EV Association has been also a partner for us, and we are thrilled to have them also this year's India Clean Transport Summit as our partner. Ragri Foundation, as well as the Breakthrough Agenda. Again, thankful for them for partnering. But last but not the least, we would like to thank the Hindustan Times for being media partner for ICTS 2025. So with this, I would like to request our dignitaries for the first channel to please come up on the dais, requesting Shri Hanif Qureshi, sir, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Heavy Industries, if you could kindly come up on the dais. Mr. Arvinn Gadgil, Deputy Head of Mission, Norway Embassy. Kodjak, President and CEO of ICCT. And Anumita Roychowdhury, Executive Director, Center for Science and Environment. So as you know, we have two full-day packed sessions today and tomorrow. And we will be delving into details of clean transport and various facets of clean transport. But to kickstart the proceeding, I would request Drew to deliver his welcome address.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Drew Kodjak. I am President and CEO of the ICCT, working out of the DC office. It's my great honor to welcome you all to the third annual India Clean Transportation Summit. We'll hold it over 2 days here in the Habitat Center. This year's summit will focus on building a holistic ecosystem with incentives and beyond, and that includes policy innovation, life cycle emissions, supply chain localization, and emission-based regulations. My job here today is to quickly set the stage for the first panel with a global perspective. As of today, the vast majority of electric vehicles, over 90%, are sold in 4 of the largest light-duty vehicle markets. This is China, the United States, Europe, and India. In 2024, electric passenger cars reached nearly 17 million in global sales, accounting for about 19% of new cars sold worldwide. This is up from 15% in 2023, and the International Energy Agency expects that we will hit 20 million by the end of this year, or about 25% of passenger cars sold globally. Annual growth rates worldwide have been remarkably consistent, despite some regional variations. We had a 26% increase from 2022 to 2023, 27% increase in 2024, a 25% increase we expect at the end of this year if the IEA's projections are correct. It's well known that China is a global EV leader, accounting for about 66% of the global market, with over 11 million EVs sold last year in China, and that was about 50% of China's own domestic market share. As of June of this year, Europe's EV market share stood at around 27%, with 18% battery electrics and 9% plug-in hybrids. The United States sits at around 10%, and the growth has slowed due to tariffs, regulatory uncertainty, and a decline in the popularity of Tesla. Globally, public chargers have doubled since 2022 to reach more than 5 million chargers, roughly growing at about 30% a year, which is slightly higher than EV sales growth. China and Europe have focused on level 2 chargers, while the United States has a higher ratio of DC fast chargers. Globally, electric truck sales have grown by nearly 80% in 2024, but off a very low baseline, and now reaches close to 2% of global truck sales, largely driven by China's electric truck sales, which doubled, while sales remained constant in Europe and the United States. Importantly, the number of electric truck models has jumped substantially from less than 70 in 2020 to more than 400 today. But all progress is not linear. Earlier this year, Europe and the UK made modest adjustments to design elements of their CO2 and ZEV sales requirements while maintaining overall the 2030 targets and the 2035 targets, which was 100% electric vehicles. In contrast, the United States is rethinking Biden-era fiscal incentives and regulatory policies related to air pollution and climate change in a wholesale manner. There's lots to say about the US, but I'll just say this, that while the political situation is unfortunate, the US abdication on climate leadership does create new opportunities for political leadership and economic growth in other markets, including India. Now, turning the attention to India, since I was here last year, a tremendous amount of progress has actually taken place. So India's electric passenger vehicle sales now account for about 5% of total passenger market, which is about double what it was last year at the same time. And in the first half of this year, electric passenger car sales have seen a 50% increase compared to the same period in 2024. This is driven by model availability and lower prices for entry-level EVs. Two-wheelers are at 7%, an increase from 6% last year. Three-wheelers hit 33% in June compared to 18% a year ago. E-buses have seen more than a 30% increase in sales of 2,100 units compared to last year, and this is driven by government policies such as the PM e-drive scheme and procurement cycles. And then EV truck sector experienced significant growth with sales exceeding 10,000 units in 2024, about a 50% increase from the previous year. So also impressive. And finally, in December of last year, India had about 25,000 public EV charging stations, with over 8,000, almost 9,000 stations added in the second half of 2024. Almost all of this is driven by government policy. When I was here last year, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency had recently published a proposed fuel economy standard for passenger cars. And while those standards remain in proposed form, 3 important new policy interventions have been announced. In October of last year, there was a launch of a almost 11,000 crore PM e-drive scheme, including 2,000 crore for public charging stations. Earlier this summer, the Ministry of Heavy Industries, present here today, published the e-truck scheme, allocating 500 crore, or about $5 billion to promote the adoption of electric trucks. And the Bureau of Energy Efficiency issued a draft proposal for revised fuel efficiency norms for heavy-duty vehicles. Taken together, these fiscal and supply-side policies will serve to accelerate EV's transition in India and establish the country as a global leader economically and environmentally. So a couple of reflections before I close. I spent a year in the Biden White House towards the end of Biden's term, and one of the things that I took away from that experience was a greater appreciation of the importance of nurturing domestic industry. And here in India, you have a tremendous amount of manufacturers, both for trucks and for cars and for 2- and 3-wheelers. And what's needed to preserve and protect that industry, as well as advance the transition, is a holistic approach. So fiscal strategies, consumer incentives, manufacturing incentives, infrastructure, and then wrapped all of that around supply-side regulations which set the pace of the transition. And India is putting those in place, and it's very impressive to see how well that is going. Point number 2 is that it's extremely important to be clear with the manufacturers as to what technology should be determined to be a zero-emission technology. So we know from life cycle analysis that the ICCT has done and many others that battery electric vehicles combined with transitioning to renewables in the stationary source side are an extremely effective way of decarbonizing the sector, whereas continued use of hybrid vehicles that are only petrol driven or CNG vehicles or biofuels are not on that pathway. And then finally, I do want to say that cities play an important role. And when I was here last year, one of the things that happened was that the ICCT had published a report on real-world emissions from Delhi, and we'd found that CNG vehicles' emissions of NOx had been 14 times what the legal limits were. That's not to say when Delhi drove the transition to CNG vehicles, that wasn't a good idea. At the time it was, but that time has now passed. And what would be really important for Delhi and many other major cities in India is to also take up the gauntlet and drive policies that will transition to electric vehicles and infrastructure for light duty and for 2- and 3-wheelers and for buses, et cetera. And so that I will close, and thank you all for coming again, and I'll turn it back to Amit.
So with this, I would now request, again, we are thrilled to have the Norway Embassy as a partner. And many of you know Norway has been leading a lot of electrification work globally. So I would request Arvinn Gadgil, Deputy Head of Mission, Norway Embassy, to deliver his special address.
Thank you so much, Amit, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see you. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be here standing in front of you. I feel grateful to be able to represent a partner country to this ICCT conference, and I'm also grateful that the ambassador is on leave, so that I can be here. It is, for me, an important moment because, while not having been intimately involved in this policy change that happened over the last 15 years or so in Norway, it's been a core issue for understanding how policy making and bureaucracy functions in our country. This, let's call it a dissection of the Norwegian experience, is important not only for other countries, but also for us. Let me start with Andrew. I'm probably going to say a lot of the same things you said, so excuse me. I'll say it in slightly different ways potentially, but the context is clear, right? We as a humanity is confronted with a systematic breakdown of the systems that keep us alive: the climate system, the ecological systems, and even social structure systems. And it's happening at a pace which we haven't seen before. You all know this probably better than most. Now, what I think is quite important to remember is that when we've faced these kind of challenges as humanity before, what has turned it around have been important paradigm-shifting breakthroughs to counter the breakdowns. And this is why I think this gathering is so incredibly important, because I think, in fact, that electrifying the biggest personal mobility market in the world is potentially one of those major breakthroughs that can help us get through this rough patch as a humanity. It's not just a solution or a technological solution, a policy option. It is potentially one of those paradigm-shifting steps that we as humanity can take. And it so happens that that step has to be taken here in India. So, Mr. Secretary, it's a big job ahead of you, and we're here to help to the extent we can. But I want to underline that while Norway is, featuring on the program in different ways, I live by the wisdom that a mouse should never tell an elephant how to behave. It often ends bad for the mouse. Let's put it that way. And it's important, right, for along any scale, Norway is a mouse compared to the elephant that is India. 5.5 million people, so it's not compared to 1,500 million people. Our market structure is different, our social structure is different, our history is different. And that's important to recognize. And I want to say that we approach this discussion with humility and want to share what we have learned, but not assuming that that knowledge is something to be adopted immediately by anyone and everyone at any given point in time. But let me say that as Indians in the room will be familiar with, the animal fables, the Panchatantras, has a very important story of the elephant and the mouse, or the elephants and the mice, and how they, through some strife, find each other in joint purpose for their joint security. How the elephant changes his way to look for the experience of the mice, but not least how the mice themselves managed to save the lives of the elephants. Maybe that's an inspiration for these next 2 days and the Norwegian perspective into these conversations. So quickly then, what is the Norwegian experience? You will have some excellent representatives here who can tell you more about this in detail. Let me just give you a quick overview. So 25 years ago, there were no electric vehicles really in Norway. There were a few small ones, but they weren't really practical for family purposes or regular mass use. Then in 2016, something magical happened. The parliament decided unanimously to back a goal of only EV introduction into the market by 2025. It was an incredibly ambitious target, and we see many of the same kinds of targets around India and India policy circles today. The key thing here, of course, was the unanimous nature of the decision, and then we come to Drew's point, which then led to predictability for industry, predictability for consumers in a way that was unprecedented. Now, fast forward to 2025. Last month, I am sorry to say we didn't reach our target. We went, the new introduction of electrical vehicles into the Norwegian market was 97%, not 100, but still a pretty good statistics. And why did that happen? So I think what will be helpful now is for the rest of these sessions to think along 3 dimensions. Again, just building on Drew's point. One is demand-driven or demand-side policy. Another is supply-side policy. And there's a third element which haven't been talked much about, which I think is maybe as important. And that is the tradition or culture of political settlement. Let me quickly run through them. On supply side, the Norwegian success would never have happened without the CO2 emission schemes of the European Union. Many of you know what this is, and Drew also referenced it, which is an incredibly ambitious policy agenda that says that all production of cars and the sales of cars in the European Union needs to be zero emission by 2035. And there are real sticks and carrots that guides that policy decision. And producers of cars in the European Union knows that there is a cost if you do not follow the ambition that has been set. And there's also a potential win. So there is a natural distribution between those who decide to follow the supply side regulation and those who don't. And this is an important point, because without the supply side regulation, it wouldn't have been possible for Norway to reach the targets that we are now reaching. But on the other side, without strong and complex demand side policy decisions, we wouldn't also have succeeded. So for example, getting rid of importation duties, having preferential treatment in congestion charge schemes, in toll schemes, these things add up to making EVs much more desirable. But again, I think it's important to remember that these two things need to go in tandem. And just to exemplify this, Drew also had some numbers here for you. But as I said, we're around 90% introduction of new vehicles, and 90% of them are electric today in Norway. While if you look at the European Union and the UK as one, they have reached 17.5%. This is not pointing and shaming. I'm just saying that the main difference may be that what we managed to do by luck or by some other grace was to combine the understanding of demand-side policymaking and supply-side policymaking into a good mix that allowed us to progress so quickly. So these two dimensions are important to take into account and keep in mind as you discuss throughout this conference. Then the third dimension, which is in the spirit of this conference. And I have to congratulate ICCT on the convening of this, because when you look at the profiles here, there are NGOs, there are researchers, there's policymakers, there's the range of different interest groups which have to be part of a political settlement, and not least the industry, if you are going to succeed with the ambitions here. And I think this is important because we have a tendency, I think, to tell about our experiences in terms of a static picture of the current state. So we'll say, yes, we managed 90-70% now, but we don't really tell the story of how we got there. It's not a story of perfection. It's a story of persistence. It's not a story of perfect alignment of incentives. It's a story of bargaining. It's not a story of political entrenchment, but of political settlement. And this is an extremely important point, because the consequences of changing the market, and let's just remember, right, that consumers will only make this decision 2 or 3 times during their lifetime, what vehicle to buy. The consequences of changing the incentive structure in that market affects everyone. And it has socioeconomic effects well beyond what I think we fully appreciate at this stage. So the political settlement culture needs to be in place for an ambitious EV strategy to succeed. That's the mouse preaching to the elephant. But the elephant needs to, of course, be mindful of specificities that are not relevant in the Norwegian context. But I do think that these are pretty clear findings that perhaps you can learn from. Let me end by saying this is a defining moment. Of the 38 gigatons of CO2 that we as a humanity let out into the atmosphere every year, 25% of that comes from transportation. Half of that, again, come from personal mobility transportation. It's clear that if you manage to create this breakthrough in this one market, it will be part of the recipe for saving humanity. These are big words, but I think they're warranted. And the people in this room are the ones that will make the groundwork for it. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thanks a lot, Arvinn, for this incredible insight from Norway. And again, I think what was really interesting was kind of what you mentioned, that the combination of supply side and demand side policies together, along with the political ecosystem, is one that has really kind of transformed Norway. And you may have not reached 100%, but at least you are very close, about 97% registration. So with this, now I would invite Anumita Roychowdhury, Executive Director, Center for Science and Environment, to give her perspective on electrification, and maybe looking at more from the air pollution perspective, as she's someone who's been working on this for many, many years. Over to you, Anumita.
Thank you so much, Amit. And first of all, a big congrats to ICCT for convening this amazing forum, and which is only growing bigger by the year. And that's where we really want to see the energy building up to drive the policy conversation in this country. And thank you so much for doing this. I know today and tomorrow we will be discussing threadbare, a lot of policy design, technology roadmaps, and to see that how do we bring about more and more meaningful reforms in the EV sector. Therefore, I just thought that why not make a connection between what is needed in this subsector with the larger changes that are already unfolding in this country and the programs that are unfolding. At the larger and the bigger level, the big picture level, we all talk about EVs for the core benefits: energy security, climate change mitigation, clean air. But I wanted to make a very specific connection between the way the EV trajectory is evolving and the clean air program demands that are being made on Indian states and Indian cities today. The reason is that if we do not build that synergy and alignment and keep the conversation confined only to what EV sector can do, then we will keep the momentum suboptimal. And that's why alignment with these larger forces is going to be very critical. And the reason why I'm saying this also, that since 22-23, we are beginning to see studies now. One, of course, to show that how in cities of India, vehicles are now among the top 2 pollution sources in many cities. But more important, when you look at some new evidences in cities like Delhi, where they're saying that not only the vehicles are the top contributor, and also the fastest growing source of exposure, the toxic exposure. But at the same time, the evidence is showing that if a city like Delhi has to meet the clean air standard, then only close to 100% electrification is what's going to enable that change. Now, if that is the evidence evolving, and we need a lot more evidence like that, then clearly to stay incremental with the strategy is not going to help. And another big message that's coming from these studies is that the first generation focus only on the small format battery vehicles, the two-wheeler and three-wheeler, will also not give us the full answer. And therefore, to migrate to the bigger vehicles, and that process has already started now with the latest reforms with the trucks and all on the table. That's where we really need to move, and especially the commercial and heavy-duty, medium-duty vehicles, because they are saying that these are the contributors, they contribute maximum, and also this segment also has lower fleet renewal rate compared to the personal vehicle segments. And that's why we have to be a lot more persuasive to now really upscale the change. Therefore, this requires revisiting some of the levers of change that we are looking for at the national level so far, and as all of you have pointed out, that so far the focus had been only on incentives, demand incentives, and with the premise that this will certainly help to reduce the total cost of ownership. But this also has an assumption that the consumers will uptake a certain number of vehicles and help to catalyze a larger market. But we have seen from the data, what you've already pointed out, that we have not seen that scale happening. So if the intended target is 30%, we are still at 7%. Now, clearly, the incentives are not really driving that to the extent, and for the simple reason that the incentives can be effective up to a point, but not once the market begins to mature. Then it also becomes unaffordable because you then have to invest a lot more to give incentives for just smaller increase in the electric vehicle numbers. Therefore, it is more important to focus on the other levers of change to address all the barriers that we have now begun to understand in the ecosystem. And clearly, demand incentive cannot fully address all the supply side constraints. With incentive, which further gets weakened, which you have already pointed out, that there are competing demand on the incentive. So also the hybrids and the biofuel vehicles, they're all now beginning to make demand on the incentives and further diluting, which we cannot afford to, that it should not happen. So what are those bigger levers that now we need to look at this inflection point when we are moving from our first generation program to the second generation program? Clearly there we know that globally what we have understood, that the role of the regulations, role of the technical standards for vehicles are going to play a critical role and maybe will be a lot more cost effective in building the market. And that's where we really need to look at that how do we therefore redesign our policies with regulatory targets and mandate, supply side mandate that we've already talked about, because that's what is going to bring in the certainty, the policy certainty for industry investments to expand. And the industry investment, it's very encouraging to see how our own industry groups have come forward and the kind of investments that are already taking place, the product diversification that is already underway, the technical developments that's already underway. But then we have to build a lot more certain signals, market signals in the market. So we need committed demand. And that also takes us, when we look at it from the industry perspective, that one currently is the focus on demand incentive. But the other part is also to incentivize manufacturing, localization. And today when we look at the whole PLI effort, and which is asking for almost 60% value addition by 2030, and when you look at do the reality check and look at the market and find that the committed demand today is perhaps 4 to 5 gigawatt, clearly that industry investments will also not really take off and make a difference if we do not have more committed demand in the market so the much stronger scalability. And that's where, even in the terms of regulations, what we have already discussed, the role of other drivers like the fuel economy standards with very clear target for electrification. And those things will really have to take shape, and therefore, as a community, our role in shaping those standards will be so critical to ensure there is no dilution and these standards are effectively designed for quicker uptake of the EVs in the market. So when we are talking at that level, we have to now also understand And that is one area we have never really understood how to use it more effectively for the upscale transition. And that is what the states can do. Now, while the central government and the central level reforms are certainly needed with the supply side, the mandates and the regulations, but at the state level, a lot more is possible. And when I look at it from the perspective of the whole mandate emerging from the National Clean Air Program, where cities today have target to meet clean air targets with a compliance strategy, where there is a performance-linked funding available today in the sector, that's where we need a much stronger alignment of the city and the state level action with electrification. The opportunity today here is that now when we're looking at the NCAP reforms, for the first time they are beginning to talk about targeted priority measures that can be scaled up instead of spreading the resources thin across many measures across sectors. And in that, if you look at the new list of those priority measures that are coming up, electrification and especially charging infrastructure for EVs has already been listed for that investment. But then these things will have to be much better informed. And that's where we really want to look at that. How do we go do that much better? The opportunity in the state is that the states can go beyond the common minimum requirements of the national policies and rules. They have the power and the authority to do a lot more. If you really look at the Maharashtra's EV20, even Delhi is now looking at that. So here we have the opportunity to build much stronger ambition at the state level. And we are beginning to see some of those changes happening already. And therefore, the states can work with much larger policy portfolio. It is just not even state level mandate and targets are possible. Purchase and the procurement targets are possible. Low emission zone with restrictions on polluting vehicles are possible. Connecting fleet renewal with targeted electrification is possible. So much, the possibilities are enormous. But how do we inform that well and do that well so that we can really see the change happening? And finally, another big change and what the states can do is that keeping in mind that incentives beyond a point are not affordable, that you cannot sustain the big change only with incentive, and you would want to see tapering off of the incentive as the market begins to mature. That's a reason why the state governments can come up with a much more the revenue neutral strategies where they can also have sustainable tax systems to be able to apply the polluter pay principle. And the biggest example of that is in Delhi, where the diesel is taxed to create the dedicated fund to give subsidy and the incentives for the electric vehicles already. You already have a model in this country. So that's where we really want to see the big change. And finally, just would want to say that we have now much more opportunity under the National Clean Air Program for the reason that this is also now moving beyond the city boundary and saying that we need to upscale the program at a regional scale, at an airshed level scale. So therefore, if you design the state and the central government together, design a scalable EV program, not just for a city, not just for one state, but for, say, the entire Indo-Gangetic plain, looking at some of the priority intervention strategies, that will be a lot more effective and will have a catalytic effect. So that's what we would really like to look forward to. And therefore, just want to say that this is where we now need to move forward, because it's so clear from everything that we have heard and learned so far that not doing it is not an option. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anumita, and especially not doing it is not an option is a nice way to kind of end that address that you had. The other important thing which was very interesting was the role of states. I mean, in a lot of conversation, we revolve around what can the national government do. And in that conversation, we do miss the role of states. And I think that's a very interesting piece on how can states come in, chip in, and also kind of help accelerate this transition as we look at. So with this, I would request Dr. Hanif Qureshi, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Heavy Industry, to deliver his keynote. He's the one who's driving the electrification at the national level with the Ministry of Heavy Industries. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Kodjak, President and CEO of ICCT. Mr. Arvinn Gadgil, Deputy Head of Mission, Norwegian Embassy. Ms. Anumita Roychowdhury, Executive Director, CSE. And my dear friend Amit. It's a pleasure to be here, and I must thank ICCT for partnering with the Ministry of Heavy Industries in driving the clean transportation, including electric vehicles and all the other powertrains. And I was thinking that when Drew said about the elephant and the mice, who's the mouse and who's the elephant? And who has to learn from whom? So these are open questions. Probably mice can also learn from elephants, and the roles also may change from time to time. Once I am a mouse, I can become an elephant, and an elephant can go to being a mouse. And there are other animals in the jungle also. Various kinds of vehicles are being driven. We do not know which one will turn into an elephant. It all depends upon the scientists and the engineers who are designing new powertrains. If some breakthrough technology is there, we'll find all hydrogen-driven vehicles. There will be no other technology. So we do not know what the future holds for us. But certainly we do try to make educated guesses. And on that basis, we have to plan ahead, allocate resources. Of course, India, I think, started a little late in the journey towards the green transport and clean air. Probably for the first time, it was 2015 when the FAME 1 scheme was launched, and the Honorable Prime Minister mentioned about electric vehicles. So FAME 1 did not have only two-wheelers and three-wheelers. It had buses, it had charging infrastructure. There were about 425 crore rupees for electric buses. And from 1915 to 1919, all these electric buses were given to a number of states. And then in 2019, we had this the FAME 2 scheme, where more than 7,000 electric buses were included. And out of those 7,000, I think now more than 5,600 buses are already on ground in various states. And some of the buses still have to roll out. We think that in the next 6 months to 1 year, all these buses would be out. But I think the fundamental change and the impact which FAME 2 scheme gave was the charging infrastructure. And now, largely as a result of the scheme, and also because a lot of charging happens at home, and the scheme only incentivizes the public charging infrastructure. So there are more than, I think, 29,000 to 30,000 charging points now, which are available to the public, and all of these are fast chargers. We are not counting the slow chargers here. Slow chargers are separate. Towards electric vehicles is, of course, one set of the policies which is there, but also the Government of India has other programs for cleaner transportation, which is represented by fuels like ethanol. We have a very robust ethanol blending program, and we have reached 20% blending across the country now, and this is expected to increase a little bit further. So we look at the objectives. Why are we at all talking about clean vehicles, cleaner transportation? The most important one being the global commitments which India has given, 2017 net zero. We have to move towards these targets, but also the valuable foreign exchange which is saved when India imports a lot of its fuel, and then clean air. So large number of these objectives are there. And we also have to look towards the fact that how to make this change sustainable. For that, we must have our supply chains intact, our supply chains strong, and the supply chains have to be diversified. We all have seen that how dependence on one country can have effects upon the production in our country and in other countries. So that underlines the need for robustness of the supply chains. Therefore, when we are talking about FAME 2 or we are now talking about PME drive scheme, there is a requirement of localization, there is a requirement of indigenization. And that we have seen, it has really strengthened the manufacturing ecosystem of the country. When the Government of India launched the production linked incentive scheme for automobiles in 2021, we expected that about 42,000 crores investment would be flowing in from the scheme. And today we see that more than half, in fact about 27,000 crore of investment into manufacturing has already come. And the remaining investment is likely to come in the next 2 years. So if you look at the manufacturing cost disability which is there in India due to various reasons, that has largely been addressed, and that is why the manufacturing is becoming a very strong point of the Indian automobile sector. And we know that the batteries are a significant component of the electric vehicles. Nearly 40% cost is made up from the batteries. And that is where the production linked incentive scheme for the advanced chemistry cells becomes very important. There's 18,000 crores outlay for indigenous manufacturing of the advanced chemistry cells. So what these schemes do is, not everyone who is making the cells will get the incentives. And the idea is not incentives alone. But the point is that the downstream ecosystem gets strengthened when such signals are given by the government. So though the scheme targets only 50 gigawatts, but what we expect that more than about 100 gigawatts capacity is likely to be established by the time the scheme is over, which is 28-29, and the last tranche may go up till 2030. So 2 or 3 other companies which are not in the scheme have also taken significant steps towards manufacturing of these cells. And then there are regulatory steps. Mr. Virender is here from CAQM, the Commission for Air Quality Management, and they have phenomenal work in understanding how the targets for the industry, for what regulatory target should be there. Charging infrastructure, I think, remains one of the most important levers for pushing the electrification. Ministry of Power has issued the guidelines for electric charging infrastructure, their safety, performance. And also they have recently, in January 2025, they came out with the guidelines for the battery swapping infrastructure. Already we have seen battery swapping taking place in two-wheelers, a little bit in three-wheelers, a little bit some other categories. And in the Prime Minister's e-drive scheme, which is currently on, we will also be shortly issuing the guidelines for charging infrastructure, and we would include the battery swapping infrastructure also within those guidelines. Therefore, we do not want to limit ourselves to one technology or to one way the things are being done. I think this is best left to the industry, that which technologies and what way of doing ultimately gives maximum benefit to the customers, which is technology feasible. So we should leave that open. I think financing is another area which is inhibiting the growth of the electric vehicle industry. Also, to an extent, automobiles, but more significantly in the electric vehicles. We, in the Government of India, we have been talking internally to various ministries regarding what can be done to ease the financing. So we have seen that whenever loans are taken for electric vehicles, usually the interest rates are a little higher than those of the ICE vehicles. The tenor is less. And most of the big banks are not lending into the electric vehicles. Mostly we have NBFCs and smaller banks. Along with SIDBI and NABARD and Department of Financial Services, we have made some kind of a working paper, and we have seen that what kind of products can be made which can address the needs of this industry. So that will include things like risk covering and special instruments where risk sharing can be done between the lenders and the secondary financial institutions. First loss can be taken by the lender, second loss can be taken by the DFIs. So, of course, these are all works which are in progress. But definitely the Government of India is committed to resolving all the difficulties which are there in the way of promoting electric vehicles. And as we evolve, of course, we are not at 97%, neither we are at 27%, but we are at 3 to 4% in cars, 7% in two-wheelers. We've crossed 30% in three-wheelers now. Our rate of growth is probably one of the fastest in the world. Of course, it's a low base, but we want to keep that pace of growth. So the intention is that working along with the industry, working with the people who care about the environment, like our good friends from ICCT, the intention is that certainly we must move towards cleaner fuels, indigenization, and technologies and powertrains which are sustainable in the long term. So Ministry of Environment has come out with regulations about end users' responsibility, how recycling should be done. Because we still have to work on the long-term effects upon disposal of the metals which will come out from these vehicles. That's an important area we must address. If not today, then we'll see the effects after 5 or 10 years or 15 years. Recently, the Government of India also launched the scheme for manufacturing of electric passenger cars, which is basically meant for foreign OEMs to manufacture cars in India. So they'll be given lower duty rates for imports. Right now, the duty rates are 70 to 100% for cars less than $40,000 and above $40,000. But here they'll be given 15% of import duties, provided they start to manufacture the electric passenger cars in India. So we expect that the manufacturing will, pick up in the country. We cannot compare ourselves in all manners to other countries of the world. We talked about Europe or US, where people mostly drive cars, but India drives two-wheelers. We sell about 45 lakh cars in a year, but we sell about 1.8 crores of two-wheelers in a year. So you can imagine the difference. We are manufacturing about 2.25 crores of two-wheelers in the country. We are exporting about 45 lakhs. So there are different set of challenges in smaller vehicles and different set of challenges in the bigger vehicles. Electric buses and electric trucks remain a very important focus. And in the Prime Minister's e-Drive scheme, we have a provision of 14,000 electric buses. Recently, the government has allotted 10,900 electric buses to various states and cities. And CESL has floated a tender. It is the largest tender for electric buses in the country so far. We expect that these 10,900 buses, which is the first tender done by CESL, and then we would have the balance, which is about 3,200 buses. That should be following after this. So we just want to go with this and see what are the learnings which we can have in the second tranche. Now, if you are rolling out 10,900 electric buses and you take the cost of electric bus as, say, average 1 crore rupees, and it is a 10-year contract where the operator has to run the bus for 10 years. So 4 crores for that. So 5 crores will be the overall cost of a bus for the period of 10 years. And that will be about 50,000 crore rupees. If that much finance has to be raised by the states, which are in any case not in a good financial condition, then you also have to think about how these payments over 10 years can be made smooth. That is why the Ministry of Heavy Industries came out with a scheme called the Payment Security Mechanism, where with the agreement with the Reserve Bank of India and the states and the ministry, there is a tripartite agreement where it is ensured that these monthly payments which are going towards the buses, they will be continuing without any hitch. And I think that gives a lot of confidence to the OEMs, because this much of debt and loan OEMs cannot take on their balance sheets. That is why now in this tender, the list has been expanded to include the operators. So not only the manufacturers, but the people who have experience in running the buses, they can also participate now. So I think once the programs like electric bus or electric trucks, they are rolled out and they become smoother, I think there'll be a much larger push for the local industries to make the components which go into making of these vehicles. And that will be a really sustained kind of an effort which we can take forward. And as very rightly pointed out by Drew and Arvinn, that the size of the economy of India being so large, definitely the changes which we do here will have a global impact. And that is why it is also important to keep the integration of the trade, integration of economies. We cannot function in isolation with other countries. We need the support of other countries also. And that's why we recently concluded the India-UK FTA. And now we're looking forward to the India-EU FTA. I'm sure that these kind of FTAs will greatly benefit both countries. There are a lot of learnings which we can take from one another. And this will open up more trade. It will open up more exchange of information and knowledge between the two countries. So I'm sure that when we discuss about cooperation, when we discuss about ways to handle these challenges, events like this which ICCT has organized, where the industry is there and the people who are really, original thinkers who have come out with some solutions. We have heard Madam, she's, such good ideas all of you are giving here. I'm sure that there'll be a solution to the ways we look forward to cleaner future and to cleaner transportation. And I certainly agree with what Amit always says, that the heavier vehicles are the ones which we have to target, because they are so low in number, but they contribute the maximum to pollution. Trucks are only probably 3%, and they contribute to more than 42-43% of the pollution. And that's why now we have a 500 crore rupees, which is for about 5,600 trucks. This will be a pilot program. We have to look at a lot of challenges are there in manufacturing the electric trucks. And unless the economics are good, people are not going to use them. So you have to find a way that they have to be economical. How much incentive to be given? Maybe we can use them in closed loop operations like cement sector, or steel, or mining, or ports. Probably we are not there yet. We can go from here to Mumbai or here to Chennai. That may take a couple of years more. So we have to look at the areas where low-hanging fruit is there. So my best wishes for the 2 days conference. And it's really a pleasure always to interact with all of you. And thank you for inviting me here. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Qureshi, for this wonderful keynote and also highlighting some of the great policy push which the Ministry of Heavy Industry is taking, not only in terms of promoting electrification, but as you rightly said, you're also looking at manufacturing these vehicles in India. Because unless we manufacture, it will be difficult to kind of sustain this transition as we move forward. So before we conclude, I would request, since we have such an august gathering, to launch a report on charging infrastructure need to support battery electric transition in India. It's an ICCT report. And there's some interesting finding that has come out. One is that India needs about 9 gigawatt of charging capacity from 2030 to about 171 gigawatt by 2050 to complete full transition to electric. What's really interesting is that electric trucks will account for 0.4% of India's electricity demand in 2030. And if we fully transition to electric, that 0.4 will become 2.5 by 2040. And again, as we also heard, that this requires a kind of a coordinated transition at national as well as subnational level for creating that infrastructure that will require to develop, charging infrastructure required to develop electrification of trucks. I would also request the two authors to please come up on the dais, and we can, sir, with your permission, launch this report today. So Harsimran, Aviral, if you could come on the dais, and we can have the copies of the report.